So hi there. Thanks very much for checking out my videos. I do greatly appreciate it. So today we're going to talk a little bit about um, cars. So I thought to myself, I want to do a podcast or a series on, I guess, vehicles that are low entry to barrier or vehicles that are fairly affordable to pick up and perhaps run on Turo. Now, this may also apply to non-Turo folks out there who are looking to get into a nice, reliable car that's not going to cost a small fortune to keep on the road. So again, it's one of those things where I'm using the cash car model that you see on Turo, or if you're going to do a little research, you do a little Google, you're going to see that coming up a fair bit down in the States. So that's kind of what I mirror up here. I run two cars out in Atwood, Ontario, so a very small marketplace. And I've been doing that for about a year and a half. And the whole idea behind that is to allow me the ability to get cars to be able to review for doing YouTube. Also allows me to offset the expense of having the car, cover insurance and maintenance, things along that line. And I like working and tinkering on cars. So it just gives me an opportunity to get out there and do something as far as that's concerned. So today I thought we would kind of revisit, or how would I say this? Fall back on some of our already known information. So in other words, stuff that I've already covered in the past. So back in, I worked for Mitsubishi. I worked for them for quite a few years. So I'm very familiar with their product line. I'm very familiar with kind of the quirks and some of the little issues that come up on some of these older. Now, if I were in Turo, there's an area in which we're trying to hit that sweet spot. We're looking for that little depreciation curve where we're kind of near that bottom, but there's still lots of life left in the car. We're trying not to lose equity. We're trying not to build anything, but we're trying not to lose anything at the same time. So that 10 to 8-year-old car, which puts us into a 2014 Mitsubishi Mirage. So is this a good car for Turo? Yes and no. Let's talk about it. Let's get the video flowing. So we're going to repurpose some of my old content, basically from back in the day when I used to sell cars. I used to do little YouTube videos, people to come through the door, and it used to work a little bit. So it was kind of fun from that standpoint. It's more of a hobby than anything else. But with that said, the Mirage is kind of a vehicle that I am very familiar with. At the point of sale, the big item with the Mirage was the resale value. When you looked at it, you could pick up a Mirage. They advertised them for, I think, $14,995, then plus freight PDI, and you put something on it, you're close to that $20,000 mark or a little bit over in the Canadian marketplace. But the resale value was very reasonable. So a person looking to kind of go, well, I can drive that car for 3 years and lose $5,000. Like they really held really well. So that was kind of the way you used to really, it's a car to get you to and from work, nothing more, nothing less, right? So things that you need to watch for if you're going to go out there and get kind of a little kerfuffle there. Where are we? 3:30. So hey there, thanks very much for checking out my YouTube channel. I do greatly appreciate it. If you could put thumbs up, that would be great, or hit that little subscription button, that would be wonderful too. Today we're going to talk a little bit about Mitsubishi Mirage. So again, we're going to talk a little bit about serviceability, maintenance, repair, and some notes with the car. And we're going to review it as if we were looking at it for running it as a peer-to-peer or rental car on Turo. And you might use it as a daily driver, or you may use it as a runabout for maybe a food service, because they're kind of ideal for that. I'm very familiar with the car. I did work at the service desk at Mitsubishi for a while. I know kind of their little quirks and their little problems, and they're good little cars. There's not a lot of issues really with them, and they're fairly basic. But if we're looking at Turo, we're looking at this for 2025 today. We're moving up to 2026. So really the 10-year mark, we're looking at 2014, probably, go as high as the 2018s. Car model, kind of where you're looking for it. The weird little quirk with the Mitsubishi Mirage, if you're looking at it from an ROI or a purchase standpoint, the service cost is very reasonable. The dilemma is that in your mind, you have to put at the actual original selling price of these cars were 14,995 plus your freight, your PDI, and then yada yada yada. You got up to 20 grand really quick. But it's one of those things that you'll look in the trade and you'll go, well, what are they going for today? Well, to get into a nice version of it, you're almost the same price as a car. Like it's one of those things you look at the little micro cars, at least with the Mitsubishi stuff, seem to have hold their value extremely well for what they represent. And it's one of those things where you have to kind of ignore what they originally sold for because they really do hold their value. Like they're maintaining 50% pretty easily. And the main reason being is that when you're looking at them from a consumer standpoint, they hit a lot of the little notes where you're going to go, okay, well, what am I looking for? Well, if it's a first-time car, they're relatively easy to insure because they're not speed demons. Okay, so they're not high theft items either. So it's one of those things where even when they get to a little fender bender or an accident, the parts are actually fairly reasonable. So it's one of those things where even from an insurance end, it's not a horrible car to insure or repair. So again, for a first-time driver, these work really well. The other one is if you're the type of person who goes, you know what, I put the key in the car, I want to put as minimum amount of fuel in it. I don't want anything overly complicated. I don't want anything that I have to kind of overthink. It is literally the equivalent of a bus pass for me. I'm not fascinated by any way, shape, or form by the car. It is literally transportation. The Mirage kind of hits that little note really well. And it's a little bit better than that. So it's one of those things you go, oh, when you get in the car, you're going to be mildly surprised because if you lower your bar or expectation with it based on what you've kind of seen on the internet, you're going to go, it's not as bad as everyone says it is because a lot of folks really kind of pile on this car because it is the cheapie of the crowd, like as far as that's concerned. But it's cheap for a reason. It's very, very simple to work on. Not a lot of components to it. It's a very, very basic car. And if you're going to go in there and say, I want to compare it to a midline, Jetta, or I want to compare it to a midline, well, even a Hyundai Accent or into an Elantra, they're not the same cars. Like it's a different market altogether. And there really isn't, other than I think the Nissan Micra is pretty close. There isn't really a lot of competitors in this place because the price point is low, like as far as that's concerned. I like to kind of think of it as it's the Chevette of the modern times. Like it's nothing to really, you're not going to write back and say to yourself, oh, I remember when I owned that Mirage. It's going to be, oh, well, that got me to and from work for 4 years and didn't cost me a dime. Like that's really what the car is. But let's talk a little bit about it. So I'm repurposing some of our content. So you're probably watching the big screen and you're probably watching the little screen there. So back in the day, I used to sell cars. I would put this stuff up on the internet to try and draw business in, and it worked reasonably well. But we're going back 10 years ago. But I thought I'll put this stuff up here, and we're going to do it kind of like a podcast at some point. So we're really trying to capture the audio to be able to go ahead and down the road make a podcast series on low barrier to entry or lower price cars or things that I find value when you look at it. I think the Mitsubishi lineup or the brand itself in Canada is underrated. A lot of folks they'll go to Honda, Toyota, they'll go to Hyundai, they'll go to a lot of other brands before they go to Mitsubishi. And mainly because they're not really that well marketed in Canada. And they kind of focus on a couple spots. So if you're in Quebec, you're probably already sold on the Mitsubishi. You're very familiar with it because they do some pretty heavy marketing in that region. Southern Ontario gets a little bit, but beyond that, it kind of pitters off until you hit Vancouver. So it's one of those things where they're kind of really kind of local market driven from that standpoint. So whenever I go buy a Mitsubishi, it's really common to look at the ownership and go, oh, it's awfully close to that Quebec border, or it's in the Quebec region and it's come over, or it's one of those things where they're not the easiest things to come across, even at this price point. They're not a bazillion out there. So it's one of those things where it's an odd brand from that standpoint. And I think if you did a little research, you'd go, okay, well, it's just incredibly underrated. It's good value. So if you're going to go out and look at this and the Nissan Micra, or you're going to look at another little compact runabout, I think it's very competitive. I think it's one of those things that you'd be very pleasantly pleased with. But things that I would probably review. So let's talk about that. So I made a little cheat sheet, or I had ChatGTP help me out with that. So a couple little things. So On the 2014s, actually even before that, the way the carpet is designed on the driver's side, it is it's like a cut pile. It's almost like an indoor outdoor carpet with a rubber coating on the back of it. Without proper mats, or even with proper mats, actually it doesn't really matter. If water gets underneath that carpet, because it's a rubberized coating that's attached to the bottom of it for sound deadening and to keep it from moving around, um, it tends to cause corrosion. And there's a wire loom that runs from the lower floor on the driver's side to the back for things like airbags, tail lights, host of things. It runs right through there. Because the way it is, it can actually up the wiring into a junction box. And the junction box is kind of a little issue where it can cause possible issues with airbags. It is directly related to road salt and soaking the carpets down heavily. A good set of mats will resolve that issue, or getting in there and making sure it's dry. In other words, it's very sensitive to that type of thing. If it was another car, you'd have another layer of insulation and they would usually be encased. So this one doesn't have that. So that's why you're seeing it. And it's really a Southern Ontario problem or a Canadian problem. You don't see it like globally with this car. It's one of those things where literally, because we use road brine and road salt, and it just causes an issue with the way the wiring is run there. You need to watch that. If I would pull the little sill plate off, peel the carpet back maybe once a year. I would probably get in there, give it a good little vacuum, everything down with WD-40, just to make sure that there isn't anything that's going to cause corrosion or issues with connections. It's one of those things where you have to watch. Is it going to cost you a lot of money? No, it's usually a pretty straightforward fix, but it's something to watch for. And if you get in there, you notice there's an airbag light on, probably related to that, but it's one of those things where you'd want to get it checked over. There is some recalls and some issues associated with the airbags. Again, a lot of the Japanese manufacturers had this with Takata, so it's one of those things where problem in this type of vehicle. You want to go and make sure that all the campaigns are covered. A lot of it is software updates. A lot of it is just verification or component replacements. There's no cost to you, but you have to hit a Mitsubishi dealership, which can be troublesome if you're in Northern Ontario or Northern Quebec, right? It's one of those things where you have to make a special trip in. So watch for the airbag stuff. Front seat rails and fasteners. Okay. So this is actually something I saw at the service desk a lot. So what'll happen is the fasteners on the seats work loose over time. And it's the ones that are the rails that are in the seat itself. And typically associated with the type of driver that likes to corner and do the little wiggle back and forth a little bit. When you do that wiggle back and forth or you move around a lot, and I'm not talking like in one sitting, it's accumulative. It causes the track to kind of bend and bow a little bit. And as it does, because it's a lighter seat, it tends to work the fasteners loose. And it's one of those things where it's pretty easy fix, but it is one of those things that it is a common thing to go in to a Mirage and you'll have that little rock to the seat. They need to get tightened down. Pretty easy from that thing. If you check the forums, there's lots of discussions about it. The belt fasteners on the side rails, because of the way they're fastened in, the bolt that's in there sometimes can work a little loose as well. Again, it's one of those things, it's easy to fix. It's not a huge end of the world type item, but it's one of those items that for safety you should be checking over. Okay, let's have a look. Okay, so common issues. So now, because I haven't been on the desk for a while, I made a little list of things to discuss. So the 1.2 liter is a 3-cylinder engine, doesn't have turbo on it. They're pretty reliable. The direct injection or the way in which the fuel system it's sensitive to, I guess, quality of fuel. So if you're using kind of a station where it's not being cycled on a regular basis, not usually a big problem in my region, but if you're up north and you're like in a small moving town, Mirage seems to be sensitive to old or sour gas. So just be aware of that. It can cause some issues. Normally running a cleaner through it can help. It'll throw up an emission code as well. And sometimes it'll come up as a leak. And it will be a gas cap issue, you'll think, but it's actually related to the injection system. You need to clean that out on a fairly regular basis. Again, it's pretty common on today's modern engines, but it's one of those things where I've had people come in on a somewhat regular basis, and then you go, oh, well, you got a batch of oddball gas. It can happen, run a premium through it, which sounds ridiculous on the price of the car, but it seems to resolve the issue for a little bit. Premature pad and rotor wear. Okay, so the initial OEM components that you get on the car driving style is, yeah, you're going to go through them relatively quickly. What I usually found is if you were going to go ahead and replace your brakes, there are options out there in the aftermarket that are very affordable, a little bit more of a premium, to go into like a coated rotor and to get into a better grade pad and move up a notch a little bit. If you do that, you're going to get extended wear out of the components. It'll cover the additional cost of getting those upgrades. Usually the aftermarket does offer a solution to that, so it's something to think about, or you can throw yourself another set of cheap pads and rotors on it and pop trunk hole, off you go. But again, it's one of those things where they're not overly expensive, but they're annoying if you're going to be repeatedly replacing them on a regular basis, especially doing a lot of stop and go traffic. And this car is kind of engineered for city travel, so that's usually the case, which kind of accelerates that anyway. So good set of rotors, good set of pads on the initial replacement. And if you're buying it at 10 years old, there's no way they're the original brakes and pads. So just so you're aware of that, probably a new set of aftermarkets. And if they're a new set of aftermarkets, they've probably gone mid-range, which usually addresses the issue anyways. In my area, because we're kind of Goderich, Atwood, Listowel, a lot of it's 80K, and a lot of it is kind of, we don't do a lot of city stop and go, so you wouldn't see it as a problem here. If you're in Kitchener, Waterloo, or London, where you're doing a lot of the construction traffic where you're stopping, you're probably going to see those eat up relatively quickly. Tires. It is surprising how fast the Mirage will go through tires. It's one of those things I noticed on the service desk. The nice thing is they're cheap tires to replace. Like the size is off the shelf, is not going to break the bank from that standpoint. When you go to actually go and replace your tires, move away from the OEM, recommend yourself into a premium product. Get yourself into a Michelin, or get yourself into someone that's really, Firestone's got a good entry point in that side, and they've got a good all season that's got a nice deep cut to it. They do really well. There's room in the wheel well to upgrade a little bit, so you can get a little bigger tire if you want to, make it look fancy. But it's one of those things where if you go to a better brand than what was originally on the Mirage, you get a little more road noise because the Mirage originally comes with a soft, pliable tire, so it'll reduce some of that. But if you go to a Michelin, or you go into a Firestone, or you go into even a Yokohama, I think it's a nice one on that particular application as well. There's going to be a little more road noise because there's a little more traction involved with it. So it's one of those things where, yeah, I would standpoint. And because the size of the tire, it is not a 17 or a 22-inch tire. They're very, very affordable. The other one is alignments. So the way the car is built, the back end really can't be aligned. You have to kind of position the front end to match some of the earlier cars, and we're talking like first year, second year cars. The rears were out a little bit, and we're not talking a huge amount. Wouldn't affect drivability, but it would affect some drivability when it came to wear. So if you weren't doing proper rotations on your tires, you'd have the outer wear on the back. Wouldn't be quite right. It's one of those things where it's not a warrantable item. It's just the nature of what that car is. As they get to be a little bit newer, see that kind of solves itself. You don't see that so much in the 2014s. I think are pretty reasonable. I don't think that was a common problem, but if you're getting into a 12, I think that was going to be an issue. And again, it's on the rear, and it's because the rears really aren't something you can really play with. The front you can, so the front you can get aligned properly. You can kind of track it to the rear, so you're kind of using the rear as a reference. And if you're going to an alignment shop that is a little bit on the inexperienced, they may have an issue with it. And I know it sounds like you're one, it's a specialty car. It's not. It's just that if you get into a seasoned tech who will go, oh, I know the Mirage, the back end stays stable. We reference the back to the front. We align based off the rear, whereas some cars use a reference point. So it's one of those things where it's just one of those things. If you go to a good alignment shop, it shouldn't be an issue. but it's one of those things you need to watch for is alignment of the cars. The suspension. Okay, so yeah, the suspension can make some noises. Usually, if you're going through your first shock, and again, it's one of those things where because of the nature of the car, it's a little lighter. Some folks, when they go to replace them, will go away from the OEM. There's a couple of good aftermarket components out there available for this particular car. The dilemma is that if you go into something that's considered heavy duty for this particular model, it raises the ride height a little bit, and then it becomes floaty. It's one of those things where staying with the OEM, even though you kind of go, well, maybe I'm replacing them a little earlier. It's just you got to remember that in Southern Ontario, it's a good example. I think it's anywhere in Canada. The road surfaces are so dodgy, potholes, ruts, rivets, a host of stuff out there that causes some pretty good blunt trauma to again the suspension system. That can create some weird noises, and it's usually associated with springs. I see that the front springs do tend to, when you buy the strut, you're going to buy the complete strut because the springs tend to wear out on these things. So it's one of those things. They're not overly expensive, but again, it's one of those things where if you're going to go ahead and replace it, you usually move up into a mainstay aftermarket brand with it, and usually resolves the issue. It's a lot of those things that if you're into a 10-year-old car, a lot of that would have already been taken care of by the previous owner. If not, you're getting into the cycle of the car where you have to watch on price because you're going to go, well, hold on a second, I got to do struts, brakes, and we haven't talked maintenance issues, right? So you're going to go, well, now even though it sounds ridiculous, you have to kind of do it on scale. You're going to go, okay, well, now you have to look at price point. So service on these cars are important. The other one, when you're looking at the Mirage, is rust and corrosion, which I know what you're thinking. Well, what does that mean? Well, on the Mirage, we're doing this here. This back dog leg likes to rust. So you got to watch that. And it rusts behind the floor on the back. That's pretty common. Up in the air and check to make sure all the suspension components are clean and tidy. They're not prone to like look horrible, but it's one of those things where it's a tiny little thing. A little bit of rust looks like a lot on this particular car. So you need to do a good thorough rust inspection. The problem that I found is that a lot of folks, when they bought the car, because of 995 or under 20 grand, depending on how you built it, it was a disposable car for them. They were going to get rid of it as soon as they paid for it. So they avoided getting it sprayed. So it's one of those things where if it's been sprayed, it's probably not a problem because of the price point of the car. A lot of folks didn't bother spraying it. You got to check that dog leg in the back, real well. The hatch on the top will go a little bit kind of bubbly. Things to watch. The front end, usually not a big issue because you got that big polyurethane front bumper. Seems to protect everything. They put little mud flaps on them, plastic liner. So usually they're pretty good from that standpoint. But those are the things to watch for. Brake lines are another one is to watch because, again, these petty little things can add up. It's one of those things you need to watch. Okay, so CVT. Actually, I didn't really see a lot of issues with the CVT on the service desk. Not a known problem with this car. Again, because the car is so light. It's one of those things where the CVT, if you're into an SUV, you're into a bigger car, it's got a lot of things to move. Where this one, it seems to be a pretty reliable, not a lot of problems as far as replacements are concerned. However, as the fluid ages, it will cause issues. So yes, this car does require the fluid to be drained and refilled. So you can do a drain and fill on it. You can do a filter as well. But it's one of those things where if you start to notice it shuddering a little bit on the way out, change it. It's not a lot of fluid. It's not a ton of money. It's a relatively easy things where, again, because of the price point, a lot of folks just think it's a disposable car. They've never really bothered, but it's one of those things, if you get an owner that did maintain it, or at least use the service intervals, you're going to have a pretty reliable little transmission there. It's not that big of an issue. AC units are a quirky little thing on this car. So yes, it's no problem with it. It's related to a host of stuff, and it's usually related to the fact that you could install an AC kit on these cars at the dealer level, or you could buy them from the factory with AC equipped. If you bought them on the dealer level and they were installed, usually the kits were pretty good. The only issue would be is if the technician was not familiar with doing AC work. So in other words, if they weren't a certified AC tech, which you might have some issues. And usually it's with purging the system and burping it, essentially. If you've got one from the factory, from the service desk end of it, I can tell you that, yes, there were some quirks with the AC unit. And it was usually related to small leaks and compressor problems. So again, not an extremely expensive repair, but whenever you're getting into AC, because you're looking at a specialty tech, so you have to have a special certificate for it to be able to work on it. So it's a separate guy in the shop. It can get a little troublesome finding that skilled professional to take care of it because it's a skilled professional. It can be a little pricey, and sometimes searching down the initial problem on, even though it's really easy and accessible, can be a bit of a quirk. So it's one of those things where I know a lot of customers who would end up just coming in every 2 years and topping it back up. It can have a small leak. It could have a compressor failure. It's one of those things that can happen. Key ignition switch quirks, yes. So if you're the type of person that puts 16 things on your keychain, and you've got the bottle opener, you got your house key, your office key, your shop key, your key to your other car, your key to your wife's house, your keys to your girlfriend's house, your keys there, so that, and the other thing. The tumbler does not do well with any weight. So if you leave anything in there that's got a little bit of mass that does the jiggle while it's driving, little tumblers on that little thing start to wear out really quickly, and next thing you're going to get in there, you're going to have an issue. Nice thing is because they are relatively inexpensive to repair. So in other words, replacing the tumbler isn't a problem. The problem is the tumbler. Usually it's going to be an issue where you'll have to rekey the door, right? So it's one of those items where you kind of go, well, got to redo the tumbler. I'm going to have to redo the door because I'm going to have two keys, or you're going to live with the fact you'll have two keys. A lot of guys will end up going to a locksmith or a mobile locksmith to have it done. The dealer, strangely enough, any place you go to get a key through a dealer is going to cost you a little more money. So by getting it through a third party, it does bring the cost down substantially. These are not really a complicated keyed system. So it's one of those things, it's relatively straightforward. Getting a third party key is not going to affect the vehicle a great deal. It's not like you have to worry about, am I going to flash program 6 of these? I'm going to have a computer cut out. It's not going to do that. So it's a pretty dumb system, but it's one of those things where, yes, keys can be a problem, and it's usually related to too much things in your keychain. Okay, Repair Pal and some other forums are I got a lot of this information from. The other one that I would probably point out as far as repairability is concerned, because of the nature of the car and because it's cheaper, a lot of the construction components are cheaper. So when you're doing an inspection for purchase, you need to check for things that normally would be part of an inspection. Because the metal is a little thinner, you want to check the floors. You want to go through, you want to check where the spare tire is in the back. You want to check the mounts where the shocks are at the front for rust and corrosion and for blunt trauma. So it's one of those things where these things can get big snow log, falls off a semi truck, you run over it, you're probably going to dent the floor on this car. Like, that's just the nature of it. It's subjective to door dings and nicks pretty easily, so that's another one you want to watch for. The other one that you want to watch is where all the seams, where everything's kind of pressed or glued together, is still pressed and glued together. So again, I'd say the same thing for any little car that's kind of in this price point. You want to make sure everything is attached and firm and that it isn't rotted or banged or twisted. And again, because these are usually runabouts, they usually are neglected. So it's one of those things where to find one that was like, driven by grandma is actually pretty hard to come by because grandma didn't like these cars. The other one is finding one that hasn't been used for a small business is pretty hard to come by because businesses like these because of the 10-year warranty. So if you had a Molly-Made service or you had a small little utility company where you're running around tools and gear, hatchback, they pulled the back seats out. These were very common when they come through. They were always being used for trades. Again, it was one of those things that gas prices were crawling up at the time, and a guy would run. I had 2 drywallers that would run these cars because they'd run all over the GTA, so their fuel bills were always high. But they'd have the initial truck drop off gear, and then their runabout for the crew would be one of these. So, and that was really common at the desk. Small businesses seem to buy these, and the lease rates and returns on them were very good as far as that's concerned. So it's one of those things where a company will look at the numbers and go, okay, it makes sense, from that standpoint. And if you got it from a company, I hate to say it, but it didn't take much to drive the living daylights out of these. So you got to watch for that. So that's a little Mirage. Would I buy it for a Turo car? If I were in Toronto, or if I were in Montreal or Kitchener Waterloo and I was catering to somebody who was running it for a food delivery, I would pick up one of these cars. I would probably look at it from the standpoint of a lost leader, and I'd have to look at it from the standpoint of what would I buy this car for. If I paid $7,000 for it and it was a 2014 or a 2015 model, I would probably say no, because the ROI wouldn't make any sense, because you couldn't get the rental return out of it, right? If you're into one where you go, okay, on it, I got to do a little bit of work on it, and you're into it for that $3,000 to $4,000 range for a Turo car, a cash car, it's borderline. And it's one of those things where it's a car that doesn't require a lot of attention, so it's nice as far as that's concerned. Like, it's not huge repair bills, but it's one of those things where you look at it, kind of go, it's the car that's going to be the small rental return. It's going to be a grind for that to pay off. So it's one of those things where if one fell into my lap and it was one of those things where it was an automatic, air conditioning, wasn't the upper model, but kind of the midline, so no digital display for the climate control, I would probably consider it, but it would be a price point issue, and it'd be a realistic price point issue. On the reference point that to pay $7,000 for a car that's 10 years old when they were advertised new for $14,900 is a testament to the car. Like, that tells you that good resale value. But it's one of those things where you look and kind of go, they're really not valued at that. At that point, there are other cars on that price point you can go look at and be able to reference. Now, if I were looking at it from a runabout, if I had to run from Waterloo to Kitchener, or I had to run from Kitchener to Bristol would be a good example, this car would be great as far as that's concerned. Wonderful fuel mileage, good road presence, does buffer a little bit in the wind. Driving them are, how would I put this? It's a driving style you have to be aware of, that you have to kind of be cautionary, be aware of your surroundings, and kind of drive accordingly within the specs and the parameters of what the car can do. They're not going to lay rubber, so you're not going to burn through tires. You're not going to do any heavy cornering or merging into traffic as far as high speed stuff is concerned. But if you're looking at going, I'm putting the key in, I'm driving for 45 minutes, get a pillow for the bum. Other than that, they're nice little cars. The AC seems to be okay when it's working, and it's not going to cost you a fortune to keep on the road. Again, it's one of those things like in Southern Ontario, watch for rust and corrosion. But beyond that, they're pretty decent little cars. So, but lower your level of expectation with it and say to yourself, what am I buying? One step above a pass, right? So just be aware of that. So we're coming to 35 minutes. I think that was a pretty good run on the Mitsubishi Mirage. Hopefully that helps you out a little bit. Again, I don't claim to be the expert, but I am experienced with it as far as that's concerned. So hope you enjoy it. And from that standpoint, if you can leave thumbs up, that would be great. If you can subscribe, that'd be wonderful. If you've got any questions about the Mirage, or you've got any concerns, or maybe you're thinking about buying one yourself, or you've got access in the area, and I am looking for one to test drive. I am looking for one to put a review on, kind of a refresh. If you got one out there, that'd be great. The other one is, of course, I am in the market for a little Mirage, but again, it's a price point car. It's one of those things where I have to look at the numbers, and it would be one of those things where I have to buy it at a very low number for Turo, because the daily on this is not really high. But I think they're kind of cool little vehicles. If you're kind of say to yourself, I'm looking at something that would be micro level, you know what I mean? Like, it's you got to stay realistic. You don't want to compare it to another car out of its little comfort zone. So I hope you enjoyed that. Have a pleasant and enjoyable day.